Surprenant went missing on November the 15th, 1999. She was last seen getting off a bus near her home, north of Montreal. She was wearing a floral skirt with a blue petticoat, navy blue socks over black tights, a blue scarf with fish pattern, a green wool jacket, and a dark brown leather coat. She was also carrying a black canvas backpack on which she had drawn a peace symbol. She was living at 463 Rue de Castille in Terrebonne, Quebec with her father. Julie's father had recently separated from her mother and thus had moved in that neighborhood and had actually asked the landlord at the time if the neighborhood was considered safe. Julie was a very active teenager. At 16, she was part of her school's improv comedy league and worked as a gift wrapper for the holidays at the Gallery's Terrebonne shopping center. After school on the evening of November the 15th, Julie told her father that she had planned to spend most of the evening at the youth community center near the corner of Hauteville and Côte-Beauce streets. She would do this often, and the center was right next to the bus stop for the line she would normally take home or to work. Her father would normally already be in bed by the time she'd get home, and he trusted her to inform him if any change in plans came up. Because this is what she usually did, she was a responsible kid. However, by the time he woke up the next morning, Julie was not home. Her father first assumed she might have headed to a friend's house that lived closer to the youth center, but there wasn't a call left on the answering machine or any indication that she had planned to do this. This is when Michael Surprenant began to feel worried. He called her high school first, while staring at the bus stop for line 25 that she would be waiting at to go to school. After a few minutes, the person at the other end of the line informed him that Julie had not shown up for school that morning. Michael then called her daughter's boyfriend, and he had told her that on the day prior, Julie was supposed to call him once she was ready to head home so that he could pick her up, but she never did, and after a couple of calls on her cell phone went to voicemail. He assumed that Julie had forgotten about him, and he headed to bed. So based on this, her disappearance would have occurred on the previous evening of the 15th. Julie's disappearance was officially notified to the police at approximately 5:45 on the evening of November the 16th. Immediately, the police considered this case to be an abduction and a search was organized. The shores of the Mille Isle River were walked and a kidnapping advisory was issued throughout Quebec. The investigators determined that Julie left the youth center at approximately 8:30 p.m. on the 15th with a friend, and they boarded line 25 toward her home. Her friend boarded off at the shopping center stop, and Julie saw that, and the next stop sat at the front of the bus next to the driver. The bus driver spent the rest of the trip chatting with her, and by the time she was getting off, she was the last person to see her alive. He remembers Julie getting off the bus at around 8:56 p.m., and as she got off, the driver remembers a man standing in the bus shelter at the stop, and he asked if the man wanted on the bus, and he had told the bus driver no. Julie lived less than 100 meters away from the bus stop, and within those 100 meters she disappeared. Despite the information they had gathered, the investigators were never able to determine who the man at the bus stop was. 1 year later, Michael Surprenant was randomly approached by a neighbor called Richard Bouillon. Bouillon started talking to Michael about how he had been guilty of many questionable things during his life that he felt bad for, but insisted that he was not responsible for the disappearance of Julie. Michael was very troubled by this statement since it seemed to come from completely nowhere, and thus really started to wonder if Bouillon was in fact responsible for it. What Michael Surprenant didn't know at the time was that Richard Bouillon had an extensive criminal history that included accusations of public indecency in '77, theft and drug possession in 1979, several more thefts in 1985 and 1986, criminal threats in 1989, and sexual assault in 1990. Richard Bouillon lived above the Surprenant residence, and he became the main suspect in the case from then on, but no concrete evidence was ever found, and he was not responsible that they could prove. By 2001, a journalist started putting pressure on Richard Bouillon by confronting him with the fact that the SQ, which is the Surrey to Quebec, the Quebec Provincial Police, had searched his home and found microscopic traces of blood in his apartment. Bouillon countered with the excuse that an old roommate was responsible for those, and Bullion was so shaken up by the intervention of the journalist that he tried to quickly escape in his car and slammed the door on the journalist's arm. The report generated many calls from previous victims of bullying, including the daughter of his ex-girlfriend, who accused him of several molestation attempts on her. Said accusations would result in jail time for bullying. In 2004, Michael Surprenant created an AFPAD, Families of Disappeared and Murdered People's Association, as a way to deal with the disappearance of his daughter and help fellow parents and children of people who had vanished. By 2006, Richard Bullion was still in prison, but then he was suffering with terminal stage cancer. He was transferred to a Site de la Santé hospital in Laval from the prison in Quebec, and he claimed that he had murdered Julie before stuffing her remains into a sports bag. He said he left the sports bag containing Julie's remains on the doorstep of the Terrebonne Church, but he saw that nobody was paying attention to it. He said he then decided to put some bricks in it and throw it into the Rivière de Mille-Élysées across from the church in Terrebonne. In January 2011, a one-hour special was produced for Canal D about the entire affair, including the theory that Richard Bullion might be the one responsible for Julie's disappearance. This was the first time Claude Poirier, a famous criminal journalist, had heard of this information. It was the first time that SQ had heard of it as well, and coroner Catherine Rudel-Tessier held a public inquiry more than 11 years after the disappearance of Julie based on this information. On September 2011, divers from the SQ started searching the bottom of the Mille-Élysées River near Highway 25's bridge, where the nurse claims Bullion told her that he dumped Julie's body. However, the search didn't reveal anything, which is not that surprising considering more than decades have passed since, and it's very possible any remains that would have been scattered very far away by the current and that particular time period. Michael Surprenant publicly denounces the time it took for the nurse or her colleagues to come forward with that information. He believes that the delays caused by her dissimulating those facts wasted 6 years of investigation time, and that there could have been more chances to find anything regarding the case had she or her colleagues come forward at that time. Thus, the only proof that there is of Bullion's guilt is a handful of nurses and other medical workers who had come forward with his alleged confession 11 years after the fact, and Julie's disappearance is still a cold case. As it stands, the disappearance of Julie Surprenant remains officially unsolved, and her body was never recovered. The main suspect is dead, and secrecy might have completely eliminated the chances of ever finding out what happened to Julie the evening of November the 15th, 1999. Julie Surprenant was a white female born on the 31st of March, 1983 to Michael Surprenant and Francine Desdaliers in Quebec. She is 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighs approximately 99 pounds, brown hair, and it was short and curly, and she also had brown eyes. She has a mole between her eyebrows and a dragon tattoo approximately the size of a quarter on her buttocks. She has fair skin and speaks French. If you have any information that's true and relevant regarding this case, you can please contact your local Crime Stoppers.